In this presentation from the Delhi Law Academy on the Indian Evidence Act, we shall learn the law of confessions. We begin our study with the definition of admission, which is contained in section 17. An admission is a statement, oral, documentary, or in electronic form, which suggests any inference as to any fact in issue or relevant fact. Every admission is relevant under section 21. Every admission may be proved against the person who makes the admission. However, an admission cannot be proved by the person who makes it except in certain given circumstances. What is the impact of an admission? This question was answered by the Supreme Court in Viswanath Prasad versus Dwarka Prasad. An admission by a party is substantive evidence if it fulfills the requirements of section 21. This is an important statement of law by the Supreme Court. An admission by a party is substantive evidence. Admissions are usually telling against the maker unless reasonably explained. This is the law of admissions. Now we come to the main topic, confessions. What is a confession? Admission has been defined in section 17 of the Evidence Act, but confession has not been defined anywhere in this act or in any other enactment. Of necessity, we have to fall on the definition given by judicial pronouncements. An authoritative definition is available from Lord Atkin from the Judicial Committee in Pakala Narayan Swamy versus King Emperor in 1939. What constitutes a confession? As per the definition given by Lord Atkin, a confession must either admit in terms the offence or at any rate substantially all the facts which constitute the offence. There are two ways. One, the offence is admitted in terms by name as it is. Second, if the offence is not admitted by name, then all the facts which constitute the offence must be admitted. This will be a confession. What does not constitute a confession? An admission of even a gravely incriminating fact is not of itself a confession. Admission of even a gravely incriminating fact. Let us see an illustration. A death is caused by stabbing. A knife smeared with blood is found lying nearby. The accused gives a statement, and in this statement he admits that the knife belongs to him, but he doesn't admit the killing. This admission of the accused is of a grave incriminating fact, but still it is not a confession because all the constituents of the offence have not been admitted. Now we shall see an example of a confession. A is accused of causing grievous hurt to B. A makes a statement. I struck B with a knife and hurt him. This statement amounts to an admission by A of an offence. This is an admission. But this statement may amount to a confession if A does not add words to this statement to bring his case within any recognized exception. If that is the end of the statement, no words are added to it, then it is a confession. But if he adds certain words to it to bring his case within any exception, then though it remains an admission, it does not become a confession. Let us see How words can be added? This was the statement. I struck B with a knife and hurt him. Causing hurt is an offense, and the offense has been admitted. All the constituents of the offense have been admitted. I struck B with a knife and hurt him. But I acted in self-defense. When these words are added, but I acted in self-defense, now what? Now it remains an admission as it was earlier, but it does not become a confession. Let us see another definition of confession given by the Supreme Court in CBI versus VC Shukla in 1998. Only voluntary and direct acknowledgement of guilt is a confession. It should be voluntary and it should be direct. Acknowledgement of guilt, admission of guilt, confession of guilt, that is confession. About what does not constitute a confession, the Supreme Court had to say the following in Veera Ibrahim versus State of Maharashtra in 1976. A statement which contains an exculpatory assertion of some fact, which if true would negative the offense alleged, cannot amount to a confession. So if in the statement there is an exculpatory assertion and which if true would negative the offense, then it will not be a confession. Exculpatory means anything that clears someone of guilt. So if the statement contains something which clears him of the guilt, then obviously it is not a confession. And once again we take the same example. I struck B with a knife and hurt him. If this is the only statement, it is confession. Then something is added to it, but I acted in self-defense. Now this is no longer a confession because some exculpatory part has been added to it. Self-defense is something which will clear the person who makes the confession of the guilt, and that is why we say that this is now not a confession. Confession is a species of admission. That is why we started our discussion with admission, because every confession is an admission, though every admission is not a confession. The law relating to confessions is to be found generally in sections 24 to 30 of the Evidence Act. A confession is evidence against the maker of it, just as an admission is an evidence against the maker of it, unless its admissibility is excluded by some provision of law. Why is a confession evidence against the maker of it? By force of section 21. Every confession is an admission and every admission is relevant, and every admission can be proved against the maker of it. So a confession can also be proved against the maker of it. But certain confessions are not relevant. Such confessions cannot be proved and therefore they cannot be used against the maker of it. Which are these confessions? Confessions caused by certain types of inducements, threats or promises, as defined in section 24. Confessions made to a police officer, as described in section 25. Confessions made while in custody of a police officer, as prescribed in section 26. These three types of confessions are not relevant and cannot be proved against the accused. However, section 27 provides an exception to the prohibition contained in the preceding sections and enables certain statements made by a person in police custody to be proved. We shall subsequently see all these provisions. First we come to section 24. which declares that certain confessions caused by certain types of inducements, threats, or promises are not relevant. Let us see. Section 24 says a confession made by an accused person is irrelevant in a criminal proceeding if. So this section opens about with a confession made by an accused person. We must understand that section 24 is applicable only to those confessions which are made by an accused person. This section declares such a confession irrelevant if certain conditions are satisfied. What is the condition? If the confession was caused by an inducement, threat, or promise. This expression, inducement, threat, or promise, henceforth we will call by a short name ITP, inducement, threat, or promise. So we say if the confession was caused by an ITP, then it will not be relevant. But what type of ITP? A confession caused by every type of ITP is not included here. A confession caused by only a specified type of ITP is considered here in section 24. What type of ITP? There are two requirements. First, the ITP must proceed from a person in authority. And second, the ITP should be sufficient to make the accused person suppose that by making the confession, he would gain an advantage or he would avoid an evil in reference to the proceedings against him. This advantage or evil should have a relevance or should refer to the proceedings against him. If these two requirements of the ITP are there, then if such a confession is made by an accused person, it will become irrelevant, it cannot be proved against him. Thus, section 24 excludes confessions caused by certain inducements, threats, and promises. Not all inducements, threats, and promises. Only those ITPs which fulfill the two conditions which are specified in section 24. In 1976, the Supreme Court had an occasion to discuss the essential ingredients of section 24 in Veera Ibrahim versus State of Maharashtra. We will now see what are the essential ingredients of section 24 in view of the Supreme Court. This is what the court said in that case. The statement in question must be a confession. Of course, section 24 applies only to confessions. This confession must have been made by an accused person. That is a requirement of section 24. Confession must be by an accused person. It must have been made to a person in authority. We will come back to this requirement. Fourth, the confession must have been obtained by an inducement, threat, or promise proceeding from a person in authority. So the confession was caused by an ITP and the ITP should have proceeded from a person in authority. Yes, that much requirement is very much there. Such inducement, threat, or promise must have reference to the charge against the accused person. This ITP should have a reference to the charge against the accused person. That needs to be considered. And lastly, the ITP must be sufficient to cause the accused person to believe or to suppose that by making the confession, he would gain an advantage or avoid an evil which has a reference to the proceedings against him. This is also very much there in section 24. But point number 3 and point number 5, these 2 points need reconsideration. The court has said that the confession must have been made to a person in authority. And court also says that the ITP must have reference to the charge against the accused person. If we look back to the bare provisions of the section, this is section 24, it nowhere says that the ITP should have a reference to the charge in question. It is only saying that the ITP should be sufficient to make the accused person think that he would gain an advantage or avoid an evil in reference to the proceedings against him. So that is one thing to be noted. And the other thing, the Supreme Court has said that this confession should be made to a person in authority. Section 24 nowhere says so. It only says that there is a confession by an accused person to whom we don't know. It can be to anybody. Only thing is that the ITP should have flowed from a person in authority. The confession might have been made to any person. The confession is not required to be made to a person in authority. What is required is that the ITP should flow from a person in authority. So, we can say that this requirement, as stated by the Supreme Court, that the confession should have been made to a person in authority, is not really flowing from section 24, and again this is also not flowing. Next question we have to answer is when is a person said to be accused on offense as used in section 24? Because in section 24 only those confessions are excluded which are made by an accused person. So when is a person accused of an offense? This answer was given by the Supreme Court in R.C. Mehta versus State of West Bengal in 1970 in the following words. A person stands in the character of an accused when a first information report is lodged against him in respect of an offense before an officer competent to investigate it. This is the first part. A person becomes accused when an FIR is lodged against him in respect of an offense before a competent investigating officer. And then there is a second part also. A person becomes an accused when a complaint is made relating to the commission of an offense before a magistrate competent to try or send to another magistrate for trial of the offense. So, either an FIR is lodged or a complaint is made. FIR is to be lodged before a police officer under section 154. Complaint is to be made to a magistrate under section 190 of CRPC. So in either case, he will be characterized as an accused person, but not before an FIR is lodged, not before a formal complaint is made before a magistrate. Now, whenever a confession is found by a court to be tainted with an ITP from a person in authority, there are certain consequences. When do we say that a confession is tainted with an ITP from a person in authority? This happens if some inducement, threat or promise is given by a person in authority and thereafter a confession is made by the accused. Then only section 24 will be inapplicable, or other section 24 will make the confession irrelevant. So there must be an inducement, threat or promise from a person in authority. We have a provision in CRPC in section 163 which has a relevance here. That's why I am showing it to you. This is 163 CRPC. It says a police officer or other person in authority shall not offer or make any such inducement, threat or promise as is mentioned in section 24 of the Evidence Act. This section specifically prohibits a police officer or every other person in authority to offer or make any such ITP which is mentioned in section 24. So, if every police officer or every person in authority works as per law or behaves as per law or conducts himself as per law, law means section 163 CRPC, then there would be no occasion when such an ITP can be there. And in every case where such an ITP is there and during the trial, if the court gives a finding that this confession was made under an ITP flowing from a person in authority, it is clear that some authority or rather that authority has gone against the provisions of section 163 CRPC. There has been non-compliance of this provision. And what is the consequence if this provision is not complied with? The consequence is given in the Indian Penal Code in the form of section 166. This section provides that whoever, being a public servant, knowingly disobeys any direction of law as to the way he is to conduct himself as such public servant. Here, if there is any disobedience of a direction of law, and direction of law concerning what? Concerning the way the public servant is to conduct himself. We have clearly a situation here in 163 which gives a direction of law, and this direction of law is regarding the way a police officer or other person in authority has to conduct himself. So if there is disobedience of this direction given in section 163 CRPC, then the consequence is that such a public servant can be punished with simple imprisonment of 1 year, etc. So these are the consequences. If there is an ITP which has vitiated a confession in terms of section 24, then surely there is non-compliance of the requirement of law made by section 163 CRPC, for which there is a punishment under section 166 IPC. That is how we can say that section 24 Evidence Act, section 163 CRPC and section 166 IPC are interrelated, correlated. Next, we move to confessions made to a police officer. We have completed the provisions of section 24. We have now come to section 25 of the Evidence Act. Section 25 declares that no confession made to a police officer shall be proved against a person accused of any offense. Every confession made to a police officer falls under section 25. The terms of section 25 are imperative. A confession made to a police officer under whatever circumstances is not admissible in evidence against the accused. This confession might have been made when the accused was free, when he was not in police custody. This provision will also cover those confessions which were made before any investigation had begun. This may be a confession even when there was no FIR. If it was made to a police officer at whatever time, in whatever circumstances, it is inadmissible by the force of section 25. The expression accused of any offense, which has been used in section 25, covers a person accused of an offense at the time when the confession is sought to be proved. It does not really refer to the time when the confession was actually made. So, it is not the requirement of section 25 that the confession should have been made when the person concerned was accused of any offense. Even when he was not accused of any offense, if he made a confession to a police officer, it will still be irrelevant. It would still be inadmissible. So at whatever time, in whatever circumstances, any confession made to a police officer cannot be used. There is additional protection to a confession made to a police officer under a different provision of law. Apart from section 25 Evidence Act, there is one more protection to such a confession. We are referring to a confession made to a police officer. This protection is available in section 162 Criminal Procedure Code. Section 162 CRPC forbids the use of any statement made to a police officer in the course of an investigation. Any statement. The words of section 162 are wide enough to include a confession made to a police officer in the course of an investigation. So section 162 says that a statement made to a police officer during an investigation cannot be used for any purpose other than some specified purposes. The difference here is that as far as section 25 Evidence Act is concerned, every confession made to a police officer at whatever time is inadmissible, but under 162 CRPC, only those confessions are considered which were made during the course of an in the course of an investigation. If a confession was made before an FIR was lodged, 162 does not come into the picture, then only Section 25 Evidence Act. Then we have an important question to answer. Can a confessional FIR be used against the informant accused? The question refers to an FIR which has been lodged by the accused himself. So this is a situation where the accused first commits a crime, commits an offense, then goes to the police station and he gives the information to the police about the offense which he has committed. This is what we call as confessional FIR. Can it be used against the accused, which in this case is also the informant? This question was seriously considered in Agnu Nagesia versus State of Bihar in 1966 by the Supreme Court, and this is the judicial pronouncement in this regard. If the information means information under section 154 FIR, if the information is a non-confessional statement, it is a statement but non-confessional, then it is admissible against the accused as an admission under section 21 of the Evidence Act and is relevant. We have already seen that every admission is relevant under section 21. So if it is only an admission, yes, definitely it is admissible by force of section 21. But if it is a confession, a confessional first information report, a confessional FIR made to a police officer cannot be used against the accused in view of section 25 of the Evidence Act. As long as it is admission, it is admissible. Once it becomes confession, it becomes inadmissible. As an admission, it is admissible because of section 21. As a confession, it is inadmissible because of section 25. So this is an important point to be remembered. Now, next we will see confessions made while in custody of police. Are such confessions relevant? Can such confessions be proved? There is section 26, which says no confession made by any person while he is in custody of a police officer shall be proved against him. So every confession made by a person when he is in custody of a police officer cannot be proved against him. But in one situation it can be proved, and that is if the confession is made in the immediate presence of a magistrate. So if the magistrate was present when the confession was made, then even if the person was in custody of a police officer, the confession is admissible. This is what section 26 says. Section 26 prohibits proof of a confession made in the custody of a police officer unless it is made in the immediate presence of a magistrate. This is a partial ban which is imposed by section 26, and this ban relates to a confession made to a person other than a police officer, because as far as a police officer is concerned, all situations, all timing, all circumstances are covered already by section 25. So this partial ban imposed by section 26 relates to a confession made to a person other than a police officer. This section does not qualify the absolute ban imposed by section 25 on a confession made to a police officer. So if it is a confession made to a police officer, then it will remain banned even if it is made in the immediate presence of a magistrate. So that section 25, there is no qualification on that. It's only beyond section 25. Now we'll see certain illustrations where a combined application of sections 24 and 26 is there. This is the first illustration. An accused is in police custody. A police officer issues him a threat. If you do not confess your guilt before a magistrate tomorrow, we will beat you left and right. This is a threat given to the person, given to the accused when he is in police custody. Under this threat, next day, he makes a confession before the magistrate. Now this confession, whether it is admissible or is it rendered irrelevant by the application of sections 24 or 26? This is the question. It is a confession made to a magistrate, not to a police officer. So section 25 is not applicable. Once again, section 26 is not applicable because it is a confession made before a magistrate. Even though the person is in police custody, but since the confession is made before a magistrate, therefore section 26 is not applicable. What about section 24? This confession has been made under a threat. So can we say that section 24 renders this confession inadmissible? Does this admission become inadmissible by the force of section 24, because section 24 covers those confessions which are made under some inducement, threat or promise. If that were the only requirement, that there must be some inducement, threat or promise, certainly this confession will be excluded, ousted by section 24. But what is the requirement of the ITP under section 24? I'll once again show you the bare provisions of section 24. Yes, there is a requirement of an ITP. If there is an ITP, if the confession is made under the ITP or it was caused by the ITP, then it becomes irrelevant. But what are the characteristics of the ITP? The ITP should flow from a person in authority. So in our case, this ITP, this threat is coming from a person in authority. Who is the person in authority? The police officer. So yes, this condition is satisfied. The ITP, the threat in this case, has flowed, has proceeded from a person in authority. What about the second condition? Is this threat sufficient to make the accused person suppose or believe that by making the confession, he would gain an advantage or avoid an evil in reference to the proceedings against him? Does this threat has anything to do with some advantage or disadvantage with reference to the proceedings against him? What are the proceedings against him? He has been accused of an offense. Does the threat have anything to do with the offense or any advantage with reference to the criminal proceedings going against him or any disadvantage? No, the threat has nothing to do with the proceedings which are going against him. The threat is about beating him. Therefore, this threat has nothing to do with the proceedings which are going on against him, and therefore this is not the kind of threat which is considered by section 24. Since this threat does not fall within the requirement of section 24, this confession, which is made under a threat but not under a threat of the kind specified in section 24, therefore this confession will remain relevant. This confession can be proved. This confession is admissible. So please remember, it is not every threat which matters, only a specified threat, a specific threat which falls within the four corners of section 25 will render the confession inadmissible. Otherwise, it will remain admissible. Let us take another situation. An accused is in police custody. A police officer gives him an inducement. What is the inducement? If you confess your guilt before a magistrate tomorrow, we will ensure that you get only the minimum punishment in this case. Under this inducement, the accused makes a confession before the magistrate the next day. The question is, once again, is this confession admissible or is it rendered irrelevant by sections 24 or 26? And let us proceed to answer this question. As far as section 26 is concerned, this confession is admissible because it is made before a magistrate. Now we come to section 24. there is an inducement. This inducement has proceeded from a person in authority, from a police officer. So this requirement is met, that the inducement has flowed from a person in authority. The second requirement for the inducement is that it should have some benefit, or it should give some benefit or some disadvantage to the accused with reference to the proceedings going on against him. In this case, the inducement directly relates to the proceedings going on against him. The inducement is that only minimum punishment will be given to him. This inducement makes him believe, this inducement makes the accused believe that by making the confession, he would gain an advantage in reference to the proceedings which are going against him. And therefore, this inducement squarely falls within the definition, within the parameters of section 24, and we can say that this confession is vitiated by section 24, and this confession will become inadmissible by the force of section 24. And lastly, this third example, once again the same fact scenario. An accused is in police custody. A police officer makes him a promise. This time it is a promise. We first consider the case of threat, then inducement, then a promise. And what is the promise? It is flowing from the police officer as before. What is the promise here? If you confess your guilt before a magistrate tomorrow, we will take care of the education of your children. And under this promise, the accused makes a confession before the magistrate the next day. The question once again is this confession admissible, or is it rendered irrelevant by 24 or 26? As before, we can say that section 26 does not render it inadmissible because the confession is made before a magistrate. So all confessions made before the magistrate when the person is in police custody are admissible. What about section 24? Yes, there is a promise. Yes, the promise is flowing from a person in authority. But does the promise has anything to do with the proceedings going on against him? Does the promise, see what is the requirement? The promise should be such, the promise should be sufficient to make the accused person believe or think or consider that by making the confession he would gain an advantage in reference to the proceedings against him. As far as education of children is concerned, this has nothing to do with the proceedings going on against him. Proceedings are relating to an offense. It has nothing to do with the education of his children. Therefore, it cannot be said that the promise given in this case, what is the promise? Taking care of the education of the children. This has nothing to do with the criminal proceedings which are initiated against him, and therefore this promise does not fall within the parameters of section 24. The confession is not vitiated and the confession remains admissible. Now, next we will consider that when a confession contains certain information which meets certain requirement, then even if the confession is made in police custody, it may be proved but only partially. This is section 27. This section declares that when a fact is discovered in consequence of some information which is given by an accused person in custody of a police officer. So here we are considering that the accused is in custody of police, and while in custody he is giving certain information, and on the basis of the information a fact is discovered and a deposition is given about the discovery of this fact. So there is information from the accused, and from the information a fact is discovered. If these conditions are satisfied, then that part of the information can be used, can be proved, which relates distinctly to the fact discovered. Not the whole information, only partially. How much? Only that part which relates directly, distinctly to the fact discovered. Now, let's see the interpretation of section 27. We have an authoritative judgment from the Privy Council of 1947 by the name of Pulukuri Kotaiya versus Emperor. The Privy Council said in that judgment that Section 27 provides an exception to the prohibition imposed by the preceding section and enables certain statements made by a person in police custody to be proved. What is the condition necessary to bring this section into operation? We are talking of Section 27. The necessary condition is that there must be a discovery of fact. This fact should be discovered in consequence of information received from a person in the custody of the police, and then there must be a deposition of this fact, and if that happens, then that part of the information which relates distinctly to the fact discovered may be proved. This section seems to be based on the view that if a fact is actually discovered in consequence of information given, then some guarantee is afforded thereby that the information was true and accordingly can be safely allowed to be given in evidence. But now we try to understand what is the meaning and scope of the term fact discovered, because that is a very important expression in section 27, and this expression was explained in the same judgment Ulukuri Kotaiya versus Emperor in the following way. The court observed that it is fallacious to treat the fact discovered within this section as equivalent to the object produced. It is not the same thing. Fact discovered is not the same thing as the object produced. Then what is the fact discovered? Actually, the expression fact discovered, which is used in section 27, embraces what? The place from which the object is produced. Not the object itself, but the place from which it is produced. And secondly, the knowledge of the accused as to this. The knowledge of the accused that that particular object is lying in that place. And these are the two facts which are discovered, and therefore the information which can be proved should relate distinctly to these facts. So what are the facts? The place and the knowledge, not the object. And also, information as to the past user or the past history of the object is not related to its discovery in the setting in which it is discovered. So, the past user, past history, whatever information is given by the accused in respect of the past user of the object, that this object was used for this purpose, etc., is not at all relevant. It cannot be used. Let us see an illustration to understand the scope of section 27. Information supplied by a person in custody is this: I will produce a knife concealed in the roof of my house. This is the statement he has made while he is in police custody. I will produce a knife concealed in the roof of my house. And thereafter, the knife is taken out from that concealed place. Now, the court says that this does not lead to the discovery of a knife, because knives were discovered many years ago. It is not the discovery of a knife. So, what is the fact discovered in this situation? The fact discovered is that a knife is concealed in the house of the informant, the place of concealment, house. And the other fact which is discovered is that the accused, the informant, knows about this concealment. So, the knowledge of the accused. Now, if the knife is proved to have been used in the commission of the offense, then this fact discovered is very relevant. Then it becomes relevant. Why? Because it has to be proved from some other sources, from some other evidence that this knife was used in the commission of the offense. If that is proved from other evidence, then the fact that the accused had a knowledge about the concealment of this knife in his house, then everything becomes relevant, the knowledge and the place, but not otherwise. Let us now consider another statement, or rather we add certain words to this statement. I will produce a knife concealed in the roof of my house with which I stabbed A. Now, some qualification is added regarding the knife. This information, this additional information about the knife is about the use of the knife. What was the knife used for? The knife was used for stabbing A. So this is about the past user of the knife. Now we saw earlier that from what is the fact discovered in this statement, not the knife and not its past history. Once again, the fact discovered is the place and the knowledge, and therefore the words with which I stabbed are inadmissible since they do not relate to the discovery of the knife in the house of the informant. So when this confessional statement is considered by the court will discard this last portion with which I stabbed A. Why? Because this portion does not relate to the fact discovered. It relates to the use of the object, the past user of the object. It only tells that this object, the knife, was used in the past in what way? By stabbing, for stabbing. So no, this is not to be used. We conclude our discussion by answering this last question. What part of a confession can be used against the accused? This question was authoritatively answered by the Supreme Court in 1966 in the very famous case of Agnu Nagesia versus State of Bihar. Let us see how this question was answered. The court observed that a confession may consist of several parts. A confession may consist of several parts and it may reveal not only the actual commission of the crime, that is the central part of course, there must be admission of the commission of the crime. So it must reveal the actual commission of the crime, but along with it, it may also reveal the motive, the preparation, the opportunity, the provocation, the weapon used, the intention, the concealment of weapon, and the subsequent conduct of the accused. It may have so much other information. If an admission of an accused is to be used against him, then the whole of it should be tendered in evidence. This is the law, an important statement of law. Please note it. If an admission of an accused is to be used against him, admission we are referring now, which means under section 27 and under section 21 of the Evidence Act. If an admission of an accused is to be used against him, the whole of it should be tendered in evidence. If part of the admission is exculpatory and part inculpatory, which means that there is something in the admission which if true will render the accused free from blame. So if the admission contains some exculpatory part and some inculpatory part which makes him blameworthy, the prosecution is not at liberty to use in evidence only the inculpatory part. The whole of it has to be tendered in evidence. It is not permissible in law to separate one part and to admit it in evidence as a non-confessional statement. Because it contains something exculpatory, so we call it non-confessional and we can use part of it. No, this is not allowed. If the confession is tainted, for example, if the confession is given to a police officer, then the taint attaches to every part of it. The part which contains the actual, which talks about the actual commission of the offense, also that part which talks about other things, that also cannot be tendered in evidence. If proof of the confession is excluded by any provision of law, such as section 24, section 25 or section 26 of the Evidence Act, these are the three sections which can exclude a given confession. So if it is excluded by any of these sections, then the entire confessional statement in all its parts, including admissions of minor incriminating facts, must also be excluded, unless of course proof of some part of it is permitted by section 27. Other parts of the statement such as the motive, the preparation, the absence of provocation, concealment of weapon, subsequent conduct, all these parts throw light upon the gravity of the offense and the intention or knowledge of the accused, and these parts may negative the right of private defense. These parts may prove that there was some other exception available to the accused, etc. All possible defenses. And that is why the whole of the statement is to be tendered in evidence. Thus, except as provided by section 27, a confession by an accused to a police officer is absolutely protected under section 25. So we now sum up the whole discussion. Apart from the provision of section 27, a confession by an accused to a police officer is absolutely protected. It cannot be used in evidence against the maker of it. If it is made in the course of an investigation, then it is also protected by section 162 of CRPC. And if a confession is made to any other person while the accused is in the custody of the police, then it is also protected by section 26 unless it is made in the immediate presence of the magistrate.